All right, guys, we're back. We had to fix a problem. We had to remove all the fancy stuff and go back down to basic, just
Right, so you
basic
don't see our website.
Yeah, you
You
won't
don't
see.
see our other social media stuff.
Oh man,
but we would rather you hear us
and see us
and see
than to
us
see all the graphics.
than to see all the graphics. So don't forget to share, like, comment. We love to interact with you guys as if you were right here in front of us. And don't forget to put your city, where you are watching us from. We would love to hear that as well.
We would. Also, the subject today, I'm talking, but you're not hearing me. So we're going to be dealing with this thing called conflict resolution. How does that play into our communication and our third relationship principle, communication and compliance? So we really, really want to home in on this particular subject because this is an area where a lot of us are struggling. We're blaming, if you ask 100 couples, what are the top 2 issues you're having in your relationship? I promise you one of them is going to be communication.
Communication. And the part that you guys probably didn't see, we asked ourselves the question live. What would be from 1 to 10? How good are we with our conflict resolution? And he said 5, I said 4.
Right.
So what that means is we didn't say the same number, but they weren't too far away. And there's work to do, but at least we both identified that there's work to do. So this is something that hits everyone. And
more importantly, as we go through this particular live, we're going to discuss why we are 5s and 4s. Because I think just from my experience working with couples and working with individuals, when we break down the different areas of communication and compliance, we will see, and hopefully you will see, where some of the conflict comes within the context of your relationship. So we're looking forward to getting into this, and I'm telling you, I think this is a subject matter that a lot of us sometimes struggle with. Hopefully, after this show, we'll have some more tools that we can, be a little bit better when it comes to communication and compliance. Right. Because the last thing you want to feel is that you're not being heard or understood.
That's right.
Right. So, and why you're not being heard and understood truly, truly does matter. So look at this. Proverbs 18:21 says this: the tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruits. Ephesians 4:29 says this: do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. So I'm a firm believer in speaking positive things into our lives, right? Now, that doesn't mean I don't deal with the reality of some things not being positive.
Right.
But I would rather give you the benefit of the doubt and give you a chance to prove me wrong than to automatically assume you're just going to do wrong.
Right.
Because then, I've already hurt us, because my mind is already and my mouth is already put in the atmosphere that it's going to be negative. So I think that scripture is very, very important. Those scriptures are very important to set the tone for why communication and what the purpose of communication should be for. It should be to speak life, not death, into our relationships.
Right. And I think it's important to note communication, the way it looks, and I guess it kind of hits on what we said with you giving it a 5 and a 4 as far as conflict resolution. Communication plays a huge part in conflict resolution, because I may very well think that I'm communicating something in a way that's clear and concise, and he may think the very same thing. But as we already know, with people, there are differences in understanding when somebody is communicating something. And definitely, there have been so many studies that have shown that there are differences with men and women in how we communicate and that understanding. And I believe it was the book Love and Respect that talks about women have pink earbuds and men have the blue earbuds. We have the pink lenses, glasses, and they have the blue ones. And basically what that means is what we see and what we hear can be a very different interpretation than the person that was actually giving the information or telling you something. So when you're communicating or imparting or exchanging information, it is necessary to reiterate what you think that person's saying, whether it be through asking questions. So do I hear you saying this? Do I hear you saying that? Not in a patronizing way,
right?
Just to say it, just to feel like you're following the rules of communication, or what they call it, active listening, but to truly gain an understanding, because seek first to understand,
then to be understood.
Then to be understood.
Let me add something to that. I think the first precursor to having successful communication is making sure that our minds are clear of anything else, any outside noise, when our spouse is speaking to us or our significant other is speaking to us. Unfortunately, too many of us try to multitask during too many things in our lives, especially communication, because it is nothing more upsetting for me to say a specific thing to my wife and then she answers me as if I said something totally different. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then when she responds, it tells me she wasn't really listening to what I said. Her mind was somewhere else, or vice versa. So I think it is very, very important when your spouse is speaking to you, clear your mind of whatever you're doing or any outside noise so you can actually be actively listening.
And what's interesting about what he said is there are times that might be the case, but then there are times where I'm completely tuned in and listening to every word he is saying. And the way I see what he has said and the way that he meant what he said comes across very differently. But yes, definitely clearing the clutter. But I do believe that eternally, we just will always have this situation where people are going to be misunderstood. But I think what's most important is the making a concerted effort or making it a priority to improve on your communication so that you can understand what that other person's saying and avoid getting frustrated. Because I think what frustrates me is when he gets frustrated that he said something that I did not understand. And the thing, what I try to explain to him is, and this is aside from the times where there might be a lot going on in my head, just I am clearly listening to you, but this is how I received what you said. Because although you may feel like you adequately communicated and I communicated this and you should understand, there's still that by the time that message goes from his lips to my ears, there's going to be a different interpretation or understanding of what he communicated. So that's a huge piece to that.
And one of the resources that we're going to be using today comes from Psychology Today. We put the link in the description there. So if you all want to follow along with us with that, you can click on that link and scroll down till we get to the three. It is entitled The 3 Keys of Resolving Conflict. Because we have to understanding this. Let me clarify something. Communication doesn't necessarily mean conflict.
Right.
However, conflict normally derives from communication.
Right. And it can, yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So now we have to get to, this is the investigative side of me. Okay, how does or why does communication turn into conflict, right? And so now the 3 keys to resolving conflict come into play. So the first thing that this article talks about is vulnerability. And it talks about us. We have a natural response of fight or flight when someone is saying we're guilty of something.
Right. And what I found deep about what this article brought out was our brains, when we feel like we're being attacked, your brain is not registering or shall I say differentiating a physical attack from a psychological attack. So you automatically go into protection mode.
Right.
And when you go into protection mode, that means you're leading with fear, not in love. And so
and you're leading with sometimes not being even rational or reasonable.
Right, because at that time you're thinking you got to get out of that situation. Right. So the first thing is in order to make yourself vulnerable, you're going to have to go against physiologically what your body and mind wants to do.
Which is fight.
Fight
or run.
Right. Or freeze. You know, you got fight, flight, and freeze. People forget about that. Where sometimes people just shut down and they're not getting anything from that individual. And so that, I think that's a really important point, that when you're communicating, but that person has to feel safe in every way in order to be vulnerable. So you have to make yourself vulnerable. It's a two-part thing. You got to make yourself vulnerable, and that person has to make sure, both have to make sure you're creating an environment where that person feels comfortable to being vulnerable. Because if not, you're still going to have those dukes up, whether it's emotionally or physically, unfortunately.
Well, one of the things that I love to do when I'm working with clients is talk to clients as individuals before we deal with the collective. I think a lot of mistakes are made when we are focusing on collective before we master individual. You do your part first. Master your part. You know what I'm saying? Master your part of controlling your emotions, being vulnerable, and let the chips fall where they may with the other person. But too often we're trying to navigate what the other person's doing and what we should be doing. And most of the time it ends up failing miserably. So I think when we get to the point where I need to master the things that need to be done, and even in this article, it talks about being vulnerable. It says when you're vulnerable, there's a positive and a negative to that. The negative is now you could be hurt if the other person doesn't respond back in a more loving, kind way. Right? But we can't live by that expectation. We have to say, I'm doing this because this is the right thing to do, or this is the necessary thing to do. If they respond incorrectly, I can't control that anyway. You know what I'm saying?
And the unfortunate thing is, if you don't make yourself vulnerable, you're never going to get to resolution.
Right. Exactly.
So somebody, and it goes back to trust too, because you have to be able to trust the person in order to make yourself vulnerable. And some people might be listening, whether you've never been married before or no longer married, you're thinking, how can people be married and not trust one another? Well, trust is trust. However, there are different things that trust can be applied to.
Exactly.
So you might trust that person as in like, well, I don't see them trying to holler at somebody else. But yet you may not necessarily trust them with information or your feelings, or as it relates to something in particular.
Right.
You may not trust them because if I say this, then I know they're going to say this. And if I do this, I know they're going to do that. And really, at the end of the day, it's unfortunate, but if you might have to take one for the team. Right. In order to save the marriage.
See, that's
when he goes low, I got to go high. Michelle Obama.
I knew at some point,
Jimmy, it had to be said.
I was going to feel the tires of this bus you just threw me under.
No, that's not a bus.
No, you're right.
That's reality.
You're right. The deal is taking one for the team. In other words, doing what's best for the marriage. You know, and that is key. A lot of us are wanting to do what's best for me, for my feelings, for my emotions, and we pretty much just throw the marriage to the wind because I'm just trying to survive. Right. I feel I got to protect myself. Do you really? I mean, sometimes we go into defense prematurely or unwarranted simply because now an area of growth in you is being highlighted. Some people cannot take it when they are the ones who have to sit in the seat of judgment, but they are a great judge though. But, and so we have to mature to a level where if you really know that you're not perfect, if you really know that, you really believe that you're not a perfect being, why is it so hard to accept correction?
You know why I think it's hard for people to accept correction? For you, for I, it's because when you've been doing something so long and you really feel as if it's been working for you and it's something that has been in your mind, proven, tried, tested, what have you, it's very hard for people to go against what they feel as if is right. But I think one of the things that is important to note here is you have to keep your mind open to actually, just like you're looking for the things in what the other person is saying, the misfires, the missteps, what might be wrong, you have to be just as critical with yourself.
Exactly.
Because if you're not, you're thinking like, listen, I've been doing this. I know what I'm talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. That goes totally against what,
what I know and what I'm familiar with.
Yeah,
right.
And so you have to be willing to step out of your comfort zone for a second and be reflective into yourself and say, wait a minute. And sometimes I know for me, if it's not a conversation with him, I might have a conversation with a trusted confidant, somebody who I know is not just going to give me some random advice, but somebody who is connected to the Father and who's going to tell me straight up and run it by them. Because sometimes other people will see things that you won't see, and you may not want to hear from your spouse, but you might be willing to hear it from somebody else that you trust.
Right. And I think that is very, very key too. Having that ability, even when you, having the ability to question, is it me? Because maybe you can't receive it at that moment from your significant other, but at least you have someone whom you can trust and that can talk you through that thing to help you see, okay, maybe you're not seeing it from this perspective.
Right.
Because sometimes we get tunnel vision when it comes to conflict, especially if you have a significant other that is talking to you about an area of growth that you have, and then they're giving you facts to show you, here are the incidents and here's why I'm saying what I'm saying, and we still reject it. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And it's like, what more can I say? You know what I mean? And so when we talk about communication, it is simply the imparting or exchanging of information or news. So once I do that, or once you do that with me, what's missing? What after you do that, I clearly heard you. Is the problem now communication?
So when you're saying after you do that,
or after you,
we had a conversation,
right?
I understand where you're coming from, and you agree with that.
Let's say I don't agree. Let's say
you agree with the fact that what I said I understood from you is what you were trying to say.
Right. Gotcha.
And vice versa.
Right.
So basically, what we're basically saying is, once communication is no longer a factor, we have both effectively communicated.
Right. We both heard each other.
Our feelings, our requests, what have you.
We got the message. Now
you got to do something with the message.
Not only do you have to do something with that message, you have to accept the message.
Have mercy.
You see what I'm saying? And the truth is, with most of us, is when we don't like what we're hearing, or we're not ready to do what we heard, now
there's a problem. Let me shout out to we see you, Dion.
Hey, Dion.
Dion is faithful every week. We appreciate your support.
So we have to be mindful and truthful with ourselves. See, most of us, the breakup in communication comes at the point that you hear something you either don't like, or you hear something that you're not really ready to do anything about.
Oh, sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes after you've communicated, you need some time to let it marinate. Like, you need to be able to kind of take everything in, because I think a lot of times people you've had a conversation, okay, now do it. Now I want to see it. And if that person has been doing something the same way pretty much all their lives, even way before they met you, they're going to have to go through those changes both mentally, and then those things are going to have to come out physically, whether it be in what they say or what they do. But at the end of the day, if it's just communication, there's going to be resentment and frustration.
Right.
That's going to set in the long run. So basically, you don't leave that person hanging forever like, okay, you've communicated, I understand, let me think about it. And you never pick it up. Like, if I tell him what my love language is, acts of service, and he's got it, he understands. Acts of service is the last thing he wants to do. So he is going to have to figure out, wow, how am I going to rewire myself so that I'm being intentional about responding to her love language that she just mentioned to me. And what that means is he might have to be intentional and say, Okay. Like, and it sounds kind of corny to begin with, like, okay, since I know she likes this, then I'm going to have to make sure at least 3 times a week, or on Sunday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm going to make sure I do this. It has to start off like that, because then after a while, it will hopefully become second nature.
Right.
But, you know, at the end of the day, whoever's making the requests, you want to see the results, and you want to see them as soon as possible.
Well, or you just want to see effort. At first, it's almost like, can I see some consistent effort? You know what I'm saying? Because if you're being realistic, you know that it's not going to happen overnight, because we don't even change overnight. So it will be virtually unreasonable for me to expect you to change overnight. And so I hope.
Say that one more time.
It would be unreasonable for me to think that you would change overnight.
Very good.
Right. So
and vice versa.
We have to be truthful with ourselves. And this is that introspective part. Okay, how do I feel about what was communicated to me? Is the issue that I didn't understand, or is the issue I just didn't agree?
Or I just didn't
Or
like
is the issue, right, I don't want to do it. You see what I'm saying? Because I promise you all, one of the funniest parts of working with couples is when they say communication, I'll ask them, so what is one major thing that you all are failing at as it relates to communication? And I'll say, well, sir, what is one thing that your wife is really expecting of you to do? And he will explain it to the T. And I'll say, well, ma'am, what is it that your husband wants from you? And she'll explain it to the T. And then I'll go, oh, so you all communicated very well. The problem is neither one of you all are willing to comply. Now let's get to the root of that.
I was going to say,
why don't you want to do it?
That whole compliance piece. And,
right.
and we brought
Which is the second part.
Yeah, we brought this up last week. Mm-hmm. But whenever there's like abuse, addiction, abandonment, what was that fourth A? I can't remember it right now. Mm-hmm. But in those cases, of course, we're not saying, you know, you're in a situation like that and you've already communicated, you know, the concerns that you have, and there's some serious stuff going on, that you're supposed to still be sitting there like trying to communicate it, and that person's not doing it. They've sent a clear message, you know, in those extreme circumstances of what they're going to do or not going to do. We're speaking of assuming those things are not in play.
Mm-hmm. This is just a relationship
that
you all are communicating, and for some reason you're misfiring.
Right. And at the end of the day, when you hear I know what I want to do, I know what you want me to do, but I just don't want to do it. Now that's going to be tough there, because from that point on, it's almost like the minute the one person decides I'm not going to do it, then what you do is you leave your significant other with decisions that they have to make. A, is this something I can live with? Mm-hmm. That the fact that he doesn't want to do it or she doesn't want to do it. Is that thing that he said he don't want to do or she doesn't want to do part of our core values?
Mm-hmm. Always goes back to that.
To the core. So let's go back to our core values and study that. If the thing that they said they don't want to do is a preference that I can live with, and if not, then you have a bigger issue, and you might need a mediator. You might need somebody to get in between that, because what will start to happen is, I don't know if you guys remember that movie. I'm probably dating myself, but I don't care. It's called War of the Roses, or something like that. Basically, it was Kirk Douglas, I think, or his son. But basically, the couple were in the same house, and they were a wealthy couple, and they were divorcing, and they were fighting over stuff. Mm-hmm. Like who's going to get this and who's going to get that. And the relationship had gotten so toxic that like they literally tore the very things they were fighting over.
They tore them up.
They ended up tearing it up. Like literally the house was like broke down. And I want to say it ended with both of them dying. Like, because I think they may have fallen off the ledge at the top of the steps or something, because they were trying to get the chandelier, whatever it was. It was supposed to be kind of like a comedy, but it was tragic because of the lengths, the messages, the lengths you're willing to go through to get what you want.
Right. So you brought up something that I think is very important in talking about compliance. we talked about principles and preferences. Preferences is just a strong liking. It's something I really, really like, or something I've gotten accustomed to doing, but it is not a core value, right? Here is a huge mistake, and please hear me when I say this. Please stop making your preferences principles. Because when you force somebody to do something you like, and only you like, and it's not a core, you go to war over a preference. What weight does your principles have? Because you've gone to war over something you just like, and because what you're essentially saying is, I don't care how the relationship is affected or impacted. I want to do what I like.
That's right.
And that has a negative impact on the longevity and the peace and the happiness that the relationship should have. So we have to be very, very careful when we're talking about complying, making sure that we're not asking our spouse to solely always complying on preferences. I'm not saying that there aren't some things in our lives that we really like, and we would hope that our spouse would appease us and do some of those things with us, or even just allow us to enjoy those things that we've enjoyed before in the past. Right. But I'm not going to war over them and break up my marriage, because it's literally a preference.
That's right.
You know, and
That's
one
right.
of the things I've learned about preferences is preferences change. Preferences change throughout your evolution in life. You may like something this year, and next year you could care less if you do it. You know, and you went to war last year over that thing.
Have mercy.
And you and your wife still have residual resentment toward each other over a preference that you no longer even like.
Have mercy.
And so
basically it was something that wasn't even worth.
It wasn't worth the fight, because it was a preference. It wasn't a core value. It wasn't a principle. And we have to learn how to get over those things.
And let me just say this. It is important what he just said, because sometimes what strengthens our preference is if our mama did it, or if our daddy did it.
Yeah, social norms.
Our family, like every generation has done this. Don't get me wrong. It might be a tradition that you find valuable. And yes, you should try to consider how important traditions and things of that nature might be to your spouse. Because you don't want to just, if you care anything about your significant other, you want to make them happy.
Right.
But at the end of the day, you really do have to be honest with yourself and ask yourself, like, is this really something that I should be expecting? Because it's certainly not based on our core values.
Right. And I'm glad you said that. Because a lot of times we'll try to make something a core value that's not.
Right.
Again, don't make your preferences principles.
That's right.
You know, because whenever you try to graduate a preference to a principle, it will not stand, because it doesn't have any legs. It can be torn apart. You can't tear apart a principle, because a principle it transcends culture, it transcends color, it transcends religious beliefs, because principles they benefit everybody involved. Right, and they benefit everybody involved.
They're foundational.
Yes.
They're solid.
Yes. So let me ask you all this question. How many of you all can honestly say that, now that hearing the difference between communication and compliance, that maybe, just maybe, your issue hasn't been communication all the time?
Yes, we would love to hear from you. I see Leon, of course, Loeb, Sakpase Loeb, he's joined us. But yeah, we'd like to hear what you have to say as it relates to the concept of communication not being the only problem, or the main problem, as people say. But sometimes things are communicated very clearly. Both sides understand, but compliance is the issue. And if I'm willing to bet, many times in relationships, and y'all got to be honest, and y'all can tell me if I'm telling the truth, you can do hearts or whatever it is, sometimes people hold on to the compliance because of something else that's going on. Like, oh, you don't want to do this for me?
Oh, yeah. So I'm not doing it. Right.
Or why should I be the one to comply? I'm always complying. You're never complying. It's all about you. We're not even going to talk about narcissism and narcissistic situations where literally that person is all about them. Loeb, what's up, Angel? How you doing? That's my people from South Miami, Southridge. Mia, what's going on in Cincinnati? What's up, Tamika Burnett? New Manchester in the house. Michelle Ward, how you doing? Another one of my New Manchester people. Katina Diggs. Oh my goodness, I hadn't heard from you in so long. I hope you guys are doing well. But yes, we would love to hear from you guys as it relates to what you think about the whole.
How are you seeing these people?
Well, let me tell you what I did. I started a watch party.
I'm like, because I can't.
Michelle said, "Hey, okay, I see you, Tamika." I had to start a watch party. Y'all gotta bear with us. Facebook is changing up some things. I don't know, they don't want us to be great, but it seems like every time we get on here, we're having difficulty launching. Let me tell you who really doesn't want us to be great. The enemy doesn't want us to be great because he doesn't want to be talking about these things that we're talking about. But we're talking about, can you hear me? You heard me.
But nothing's changing.
But nothing is changing. We're talking about conflict resolution and the things that contribute to that or can hurt the conflict resolution. We talked about how communication, people always say communication is the biggest thing in relationships. And we agree it is a huge part. But another part that people have been neglecting or have not even thought about is once you communicate it, that person understands where you're coming from. They understand what it is that you're asking for. Are they complying? Are they actually behaving in such a way that shows that you're willing to change and do some things differently?
And the reason that's so important, sweetie, is because most of us don't really understand the purpose of communication. The purpose of communication, it is a vehicle for change. So when I'm sharing my feelings or my thoughts, and giving you information and news, I'm giving you that information because I'm looking for it to alter something. Behavior, thought process, it's meant to change something. But when we don't see a change after we've communicated, we're struggling because our brain does not want to receive or don't want to believe that you're just being rebellious and don't want to do it. So we'll blame it on communication. We're having a communication problem. Are we really?
Well, you don't want to conceive it because that person, or they say they love you.
Right.
You've made a commitment with them. So certainly because they love you, they're going to try to do the things that you ask. And once again, when I say do the things that you ask, we're talking about those things within reason.
Right.
We're not talking about like things that's like, I'm not even going to, because this is a child-friendly podcast here or Facebook Live. But like, there are going to be some things, like I said, might go against your core values. But here's what I think is important. Make sure you've discussed your core values.
Yeah, you all should be, long before you get married, you should have had the conversation on what we believe. Right, but I know that. But I'm just saying, do we believe the same things? Do our core values mesh? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But when we don't take the time to determine if we have the same value systems, we will have problems well beyond communication.
We're going to pay for it. And let me just say this to the women. Do not, how you doing, Melissa?
Where is your watch party?
I hadn't seen, just go to my page and join my watch party. Because he's not seeing anything.
I'm not seeing anybody and nothing.
But what's up, D and Ty? But let me just say this to the women. And I'm gonna say it because it comes better from a woman when it's this kind of thing than from a man. To single women in particular, and I don't know if they're watching or even watching the replay, you can send it to them. It's just not worth rushing into a relationship for the sake of feeling like you have somebody at your side and you guys have not sat down and had the conversation about your core beliefs and what you value. Because guess what? And I don't care what the reason is that you're getting married for, whether it's better to marry than to burn. Well, yes, that's true, but that shouldn't be it. Because once, you do marry and you're able to have sex or guilt-free sex or what have you, now you got that person that you got to deal with. Now you got that person that you got to live with. I remember in my first marriage, the first time that my ex got on my last nerve, I just looked at him and said to myself, I didn't say it to him, like, I got to stay here. Like, I got to actually lay in this bed next to you. And you have just really gotten, like, I literally wanted to flee. And it wasn't even something that was like a core value thing that made me so upset. It was just something that we just didn't agree upon.
Mm-hmm.
So when you are considering, if you're in a relationship and you're considering that person that you want to spend the rest of your life with, don't fall for the okie doke that you tell yourself. Don't convince yourself that, oh, it'll get better once we get married. Let me tell you something about men. Once you get married, they got you. They have you. Like, men like to feel as if they're hunters. You know, they see what they want. And if they're hunting, usually there's a challenge, right? Let's say there was a challenge that you presented. Nowadays, there's hardly any challenges. It's very easy. But let's say there is a challenge. And then they get you. Now they have you. And what happens is you want that appreciation for what they have to stay there. You want it to be in place. But if you rushed into a situation without making sure that that relationship is solid on so many different levels, not just on a physical level, but yet we do bond on a much deeper level. Mm-hmm. We're going in the same direction. We have the same core values. Now the next layer is when preferences come up, when things come up like, this is my love language, this is how I feel loved, okay? Now, here's the thing about preferences and love language. Your love language can change over time, but if you go and you take that love language test, it's pretty much going to show you the things that you value, okay? Now, what that looks like and how they prefer to be loved is going to change from person to person. Right. So I wouldn't say at that point, you decide, well, this is a preference. I don't want to show you that love language in that way. I want to show it to you in this way. Then you're shooting yourself in the foot. Yeah. You're defeating yourself if you then want to manipulate the preference of the person's love language.
Yeah. So that you use a word that is powerful, manipulate, and we all are guilty of that at times. You know, again, for those of you who are just tuning in, we're talking about communication, conflict resolution. And we talked about one of the resources we're using in Psychology Today. It's called the 3 Keys to Resolving Conflict. And the first key to resolving conflict is being vulnerable, having some vulnerability, right? Mm-hmm. Being vulnerable and understanding that when you're vulnerable, you are opening yourself up to be hurt if they don't respond appropriately, right?
Right.
But the vulnerability is necessary to actually elevate to the next level. Because if you're not vulnerable, you're being defensive. And if you're being defensive, you're not going to receive what you need to receive.
Hence the conflict.
Right, hence the conflict.
And what usually happens is one person's lack of vulnerability leads to the second person's lack of vulnerability.
It's a chain reaction.
So that's the road you're going to take. That's the path you're going to take. Oh, well, I can put up my dukes too.
And I
can put up a block too.
What we call it, being petty.
Being real petty, petty.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So the second way to resolve conflict is accountability.
We hear you, Melissa. Melissa says she needs this. Melissa, we all need this. We judged ourselves on conflict resolution. He said 5, I said 4. Yeah. So we're all in need of this. So what's the second one, honey?
Accountability. That's yours. You talk to us about accountability.
Oh my goodness. Let me tell you something.
Powerful.
Accountability is huge because a lot of times when we are in conflict, the first thing we want to say is, it's not my fault.
Right.
Okay. And at the end of the day, we all want to protect our self-esteem. It's like an unconscious thing. Mm-hmm. And if I'm being really honest with you, when we have conflict, I really feel like I'm right most of the time. Yep, I said it. I feel like most of the time I'm right. Because before I speak, look
in that camera right there.
I feel like most of the time I'm right. Ooh. And let me tell you why. I have physiological
witnesses.
I have physiological evidence. Men and women's brains are different. There's the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere.
There she go with some science.
Women have more connective tissue between the right and left hemisphere of their brain.
Gotcha.
So those relay stations are intact. So basically we're able to pull things from here, thither, and yon. We're like a bowl of spaghetti or a bowl of salad. We can pick anything at any given time. You guys are like waffles. It's like a bunch of boxes.
Right.
And you can only handle one thing at a time.
Right.
So sometimes it takes you a second to catch up. No offense to men. But in those times, I really feel as if I'm right a lot of the times. But however, regardless of how I feel, I have to be willing to analyze myself. It goes back to that. And take responsibility and be accountable for anything that I may have done, even if in my mind I'm thinking what he did was much greater than what I did. Because, in relationships, we like to weigh things out. Like, well, I did this, but you did this, which was much worse. But if we're being honest, conflict doesn't arrive in a vacuum.
Right.
Like, it doesn't happen in isolation.
That's right.
The mere nature of conflict involves one or more people. I mean, two or more people.
Right. Right.
So you have to be willing.
Well, you can be in conflict with yourself too.
I mean, you can, but that's
part of the problem. But
go ahead. But that's a whole nother psychological thing.
Well, hey,
you got to figure out how many people is within you,
hey,
how many voices you're listening to. So, and that's another show for another day. But at the end of the day, you have to be willing to say to yourself, you know what? I'm going to accept some responsibility for this.
The responsibility for what I did or said.
For what I did, like whatever part that you played. So
right.
When I said some, I'm saying of everything that transpired.
Right.
Here's the part that I played.
Right. Here's my role.
And here is how I'm going to accept it. But if I'm listening to people, even though I don't see this comment, but I know people are probably thinking this, suppose you're accepting responsibility, but the other person isn't accepting responsibility.
Has nothing to do with you and your growth.
Boom. Drops the mic.
Has nothing to do with you and what you do. I first heard this from my godmother. She said, baby, 2 wrongs don't make a right.
Have mercy.
So what she was essentially saying was, Jimmy, just because they're doing wrong doesn't justify you doing wrong. So now both of you are going to stand before the judgment. I was like, wow. So even now at 50 years old, it's like when Rachel is talking and thinking she's right, and all of the evidence has been laid out to show that she's not, if I respond in a way that now makes me wrong, now both of us going to have to deal with the consequences of those actions. Right. And so it comes back to this notorious word called maturity.
That's right. That's right.
And the truth, if the truth be told, a lot of times we're not mature
in relationships,
in our relationships, especially in the communication process, because the communication process is just not talking. The communication process also deals with complying
and listening.
Right.
That's why you got 2 ears and one mouth.
The deal is, once I hear you, can I be mature enough to say, let me act on what I heard?
That's right.
Or am I one of those people who are being very immature and saying, because I didn't like that, I'm not doing it?
And let me say this to you guys, and reason why I can say it, because I feel the same way as well. Sometimes you can be a very mature person, like on a day-to-day basis. No, on a day-to-day basis, you are a mature person.
Right.
As you interact with people in public, as you're at work, even times that you interact with your significant other. But then the minute conflict arises, all of a sudden, maturity goes out the window. Especially, and let me just interject this in here. There are some rules of engagement. And many times in relationships, to feel like we're getting the one-up on people, we throw some foul balls. And you shouldn't throw that foul ball. And you have to be mature enough to get that back and say, you know what? I threw that one. Let me go pick it up and bring it back. My bad. So that you can have a decent conversation without the foul balls. What are our foul balls? Name calling. What are our foul balls? Attacking the person and not the issue. Let me say that again. A lot of us are guilty. The minute you get upset, that immaturity is going to want you or make you want to call each other names. But when you start to call each other names, the conversation now becomes about the name calling, the foul ball you threw, instead of the issue that is at hand. And see, I think that's what's deep. For those of you who are Christians, that's how the enemy weaves his way into your relationship and causes a gap. Because he says, you know what? I'm going to make him or her feel justified. Right. In doing what they did. In saying what they said, in doing what they did, and in protecting themselves. Right. Because you feel like you've been offended. Guys, we want to hear from you. I'm seeing a lot of people. Lauren, one of my former students. How you doing, Lauren? Nehemiah. Met Nehemiah in middle school. What's going on? Chanel. Thank you so much for joining us. But we would love, we know you guys are listening, but we would love to get your feedback as it relates to this conversation that we're having, because I think it affects us all.
So here's a question I would love to get some feedback on. Through listening to us so far, do you realize that, you've understood what your spouse was saying, but you just either didn't like it or didn't want to do it? If that's the case, throw some thumbs up. We want to see.
Now
we want to see.
Get them in trouble.
Well, here's the deal. How can you grow? The first level of change is acknowledgement.
That's right. I
have to acknowledge that that's true.
That's true.
Right? That's the step one to change. Mm-hmm. Step two then is, okay, now that I know that I'm capable and I've been doing that, so now I need to be intentional about doing the opposite.
And let's be honest, guys. Mm-hmm. And as we're talking to you, I always try to think of, myself outside of this broadcast. How do I feel day in, day out when this happens, when we're having these conversations? At the end of the day, marriage is not what we all once thought it was.
Right.
As it relates to this fairy tale. Mm-hmm. We're not saying there can't be joy and bliss and happiness within a relationship. But what we are saying is when you have two people from two different walks of life, two different backgrounds, two different experiences, mm-hmm. conflict is going to arise. Mm-hmm. And so if you have a false perception of what marriage is, and you thought that when you got into the marriage, everything was going to be perfect because we were just so in love, right. And our wedding was so beautiful. That's a whole nother thing. People get caught up into the wedding and not the marriage. You have to realize that this bond that you have with your significant other is bigger than that. It's bigger than the fairy tale that you want. Right. Could it perhaps be that there are some things within the both of you that need to be worked out, some character flaws, mm-hmm. Some selfishness, mm-hmm. some narcissism in some cases with some people. Lord help them with that. That need to be worked out. And when you think of it in that way, you don't have to feel like, this is just too much. I'm out of here.
Right.
It's easy to be like, I'm out of here. But at the end of the day, if you've made a commitment to one another before your friends, before God, before whomever you felt was important enough to be there, and most importantly, to the person that you're with, mm-hmm. then it should be, this is where that maturity, that growing up has to take place. And sometimes, this part's so deep. Sometimes I might be behaving more mature than he is. And sometimes he might be behaving more mature than I am. Sometimes you got to kind of throw out that lifeline, like, come on, baby, bring it back. Let's go back to what we know. That's why those core values are so important. Because mm-hmm. when you bring them up, nobody should be able to argue the core values that you both agreed upon.
Yeah, one of the things I learned a few years ago was, you mentioned earlier that we may be mature, mm-hmm. Most of the time, but when it comes to conflict, maturity goes out the window. There's this saying that I learned a couple of years ago, and it says, if you want to know the level mm-hmm. of your maturity,
have mercy.
Watch how you handle conflict.
Whoa. Did y'all just hear what he said?
See, a lot of times we're very mature in our job. We're very mature in certain areas. But when you want to know the level of maturity you really are, monitor how you handle yourself during times of conflict.
And the fact that you said level, mm-hmm. that indicates that there is growth.
Yeah, right.
It's a process, not a destination.
And I'm glad you said that, because here's what's key about growth. If you think you are an A student when you're really a D student, you're not going to grow.
Not only that.
No, but listen, let that marinate for a second.
Yes.
A lot of people want to associate themselves as an A student when in fact you are a D student in the areas of maturity sometimes. You know what I'm saying? Especially around conflict. So if I'm thinking I'm an A when I'm really a D.
Have mercy.
What have I done for that gap there between D, C, B, and A?
And
I'm not doing anything.
Right. I'm going to add on to what you said, mm-hmm. which is what may have been an A in first grade.
Right.
You take that same first grade skill set and try to apply it to middle school.
Right.
That's going to be a D or F.
Right.
So that's why we say it's growth. It has to move with you.
Right.
you have to grow as you get older and as you mature.
Right.
That's what you're taking into the relationship.
What you did last year may not suffice for this.
May not suffice for this year.
Right.
And that's why some people are emotionally incompatible.
Right.
Because their emotional maturity is not in the same place. I mean, there's so many things that bring about emotional immaturity. I'm not saying a relationship can't work if one person had been married before and had children and the other person had not been married. But people, let me tell you, you're fooling yourself to think that there's not going to be conflict due to just basically that emotional experience that the person who's been married with children had, as opposed to the one who hasn't. So what that means is the one who hasn't has to be willing to like have an open mind and be open to what it's like to now be a step parent or maybe the parent, because the other parent's not even in the picture. You know, the other parent of that child, the biological parent of that child, or now realize, wow, I've never been married before. So I don't even know what this looks like. And the person who has been married, had the children, is going to have to be patient.
Right.
And they can't be a know-it-all just because they've been married before and had a child before. So if you notice, you know, the one common thing that we keep talking about is like literally as a unit, you literally have to be willing to work together. And I think one of the scriptures we had, you know, the scripture talks about shall a man leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. Right. And when we think about that one flesh, you know, we think about physical intimacy. But that thing is spiritual, it's emotional, it's on every level of coming together. Doesn't mean you've lost your identity. Right. And you're not the person that you were, but literally you're having to come together in that thing and grow and move in the same direction.
And let me just throw another little nugget out there for those who are listening. Who we sometimes try to hold on to may not be who God is trying to make us. I hear people say this, I want somebody to love me for me. Have you really looked at you lately? Have you looked at your attitude? Have you looked at how you deal with life? You know what I'm saying? Sometimes we don't really look at ourselves. We paint a fake picture of who we really are as a human being.
We're not being honest with who we are.
And so we try to hold on to something that God himself is trying to change.
And then wonder why, because, you know, and once again, I do not stand in judgment when I say this.
Right. I'm saying
I've been married, single, married again, but wonder why it's like, Lord, I can't find anybody. Well, if you're a woman and you're a Christian, the last I checked, the Bible says, he that findeth a wife findeth a good thing. So you don't have to, as a woman, go finding anything.
You shouldn't be looking.
You shouldn't have to look.
Just prepare.
And when we say look, of course you're going to see men around. Right. But just prepare. And the man should be preparing himself.
Right.
Because you can't be raggedy looking for fine, you know, platinum gold. You have to have yourself together. But in the meantime, while you're working on you, they're working on them, you're working on you. I mean, that's so deep how you said it. Sometimes we're trying to hold on to that person that we're really not. That's not what God wants you to be. Right.
Hey, Melissa Fowler said that. She said, conflict is our number one issue. Learning how to apologize in my husband's apology language has been a process. I grew up in an environment where no one ever said sorry. I'm so immature in this area. So anytime conflict is a topic, I listen. A good book for those that need help is When I'm Sorry Isn't Enough by Gary Chapman.
Yeah, he's an excellent author.
Melissa. Girl, I'm tipping my hat that I don't have off to you.
Yes.
Because you just did the first step in growing, which is acknowledgement.
Yeah, and she's taking accountability.
Right, and she took accountability. So now my only challenge to you now, Melissa, would be to do the opposite of what you're accustomed to doing.
Inclined to doing.
So now that you know that you're not accustomed to saying I'm sorry, and your husband was like, look, are you gonna say I'm sorry? Like, we've proven that there was some offense here. And so now just be more intentional, because all you're doing is recreating another habit.
And she added something here that I find is interesting. She said, learning how to apologize in my husband's
right.
apology language.
Right.
And that's huge
Mm-hmm.
because you may think you're apologizing based on what you think of what apology looks like.
Right. Because like, and let me be transparent. My wife, she's another one that she ain't.
Not true.
I'm sorry, and I'm apologizing.
Not true.
Rachel, come on now.
I'm gonna clarify.
It's not that is not a ready phrase that comes out of her mouth. However, this is what, and you tell me if I'm wrong.
I will.
Here's when I know or believe that she's had some change of heart or recognition that she may have been wrong, because then she will do something. There will be some act of service that she will do that will show me maybe she has reconsidered her position on whatever it was we went over.
Let me clarify. And this is a point of conflict for us. And ever since I said it, I don't think my husband truly understood what I was communicating. I remember telling him, I don't believe in saying sorry. And he took that and ran with it. I believe in saying I apologize. There was a time I used to say I'm sorry until I saw a video that was just talking about, it was just showing all the different scenarios where women are always saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. We enter a room, I'm sorry. Like any little thing, when it doesn't even call for I'm sorry, we're saying I'm sorry. And as women, especially as Black women, we have to stop putting that in our heads, like being sorry for things just because of our mere presence as we walk into a room. So I made a commitment that if I did do something wrong, I'm going to start being intentional by saying I apologize. Because when I'm telling you I apologize, in essence, what I did, I should not have done. So it's not that I don't want to say I'm sorry. I can apologize. But what ends up happening with he and I is the very thing that he's accusing me of, I feel as if he saw it in the wrong way or took it in the wrong way. Like, that's not what I was doing. But when I truly feel as if I've done something wrong, whether he wants to admit it or not, I've said to him, I apologize for that. I should not have done that. I grew up in a household where we apologize for things. That was not an issue for me. But back to Melissa, she just said, I just say I'm sorry and move on. And he's still angry. And I think I said, okay, here's the thing. She says, and I think I said sorry. Here's the thing, Melissa. And my husband kind of hit on it with how I do it. If you say you're sorry, the question is, are you saying it quickly just to end it? What is your tone?
Body language.
What is your body language? Does it clearly seem like you're just trying to end the conversation? Because people do that too. Like, I don't believe in just like using that just to exit something.
Right.
And then, communication, compliance, are your actions showing
there we go
that you truly are sorry for it? Especially if it's something that he feels like it happens over and over and over again. I want to make sure it's a little after 7. I want to make sure we hit that last one.
Yeah,
too.
we are, because that's the close of it. But I think it's a good practice for all of it, because I want to go back to what you said about the video you saw. We have to make sure that we put everything into context.
She said, "I'd be petty."
Yeah, we need to put everything into context.
Yes.
The video you saw was not out of context for your marriage or your relationship. You coming into a room, oh, I'm sorry, you're present, I'm sorry. We're not talking about that. We're talking about an offense.
Right.
An actual offense in the context. And if you actually look it up, there is a distinct difference between saying I apologize and I'm sorry.
I'm gonna look it
up. Apologies can be, and in most cases, are just saying, okay, I'm aware that your feelings are hurt.
Okay, here is the definition of an apology. Can I give it to the people?
Well, go ahead, since I was.
Okay. A regretful acknowledgement of an offense or failure. A regretful acknowledgement of an offense or failure. That sounds like I'm sorry. For me, it's not even so much, it's just the terminology. I don't want to say I'm sorry, because like when people say, you sorry, you ain't no good, you sorry, I want to use the word I apologize because I want to acknowledge that offense. But continue with what you were
Look
saying.
up the difference between the two words.
I
I'm sorry
will.
and apologize. But
Right.
but we want to get back to the final piece.
We're about to have conflict.
The final piece here, in this conflict resolution. First of all, the communication. Be truthful with yourself. Is it really communication? Did you hear? Did you understand? Or is it that you didn't agree and you didn't like? Is why there's not compliance. Because remember, communication is the vehicle for change. So if your significant other is saying to you, you hurt my feelings, and you go, I'm sorry, and keep on moving, they don't feel like you meant what you said.
Right.
Or you keep doing the same thing that you just said I'm sorry for, and so they don't believe that you're sorry. So communication was there, but the compliance wasn't there. So we want to make sure that those two elements are together when we're talking about the communication process. It is a two-part evolution. You say what you're going to say, and then there has to be a response to what is communicated back and forth to the two people that's communicating. So I think that's where we've dropped the ball. But once we learn how to communicate, share our feelings, once we comply, then what happens is a connection takes place. When there is compliance after communication, connection takes place.
And what does connection look like? Connection
looks like this. I'm drawn closer to you rather than push further away from you.
On what levels?
And all of the levels that matter. Spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically. I'm now being drawn back to you because
I want to be next to you.
I want to be close to you. I want to be next to you. Why? Because there was some vulnerability. You were vulnerable. There was some accountability. You took responsibility for what happened.
And you responded. And
then last but not least, you responded the correct way to my pain or my frustration, and vice versa. When you get the response that you're looking for from me, your mannerisms are totally different. You see what I'm saying? So we understand that our goal is to maintain a bond or a connection with our spouse. And how do you do that? It's through, proper communication and compliance.
That's right.
And once we accomplish those things, guys, we will see our relationships take off to another level.
So communication, compliance,
and then
which leads to connection.
Yes.
I do have the definition for sorry. Okay. The definition for sorry is feeling distress, especially through sympathy with someone else's misfortune. All right. Whereas the definition for an apology was a regretful acknowledgement of an offense or failure. As I hear those two, if we're being honest, apology sounds like it's what you're looking for as it relates to when you're in a situation where that person wants to know, Melissa, you actually understand, you acknowledge that you did this and you regret that you did it. And you don't want to do it again. Whereas when you're saying, I'm sorry for something, feeling distress, especially through sympathy with someone else's misfortune. If you want to say, I'm sorry, that is fine. But I don't ever want my husband to think that just because I say I apologize, it's any weaker than saying I'm sorry. Because the minute I say I apologize, that is an acknowledgement of I did something wrong. And I have to make it right. And I think, we go back and forth about it, but I think that's what's most important is acknowledging. And even though relationships are not going to be perfect, our relationship is not perfect. People tell us all the time, like June will make 8 years since we've been married. We both have been married before. So we've had experience in marriages. And they look from the outside looking in like, gosh, you guys seem like you've been married for a long time. And
it feels that way.
And
that's in a good way. For me, when I say that's in a good way.
Yeah, it is.
It feels like we've been together.
And we are very comfortable with one another. And sometimes like we pretty much tell each other what we're feeling. We don't have that issue of not telling each other how we feel.
In other words, we don't have problems communicating.
Well, let me take that back, baby, for you. We tell each other how we feel. But sometimes we do have a problem in communicating because what I'm saying to you, you might be interpreting it differently than what I'm how I'm taking it, and vice versa. That's what I see. It's like we're communicating, we're saying stuff, we're trying to get our point across, but sometimes there are misfires in what you understood me to be saying and what I understood you to be saying. That's what I have experienced.
Okay.
And we've never had that before, where I've misunderstood something you said.
Oh no,
or you misunderstood.
Yes, you have.
Okay, and I have, and you have misunderstood things that I've said.
No, I understood exactly what
you know
what?
that right there, people, what you just saw, that was organic.
No, I always understood what you said.
No, he does.
It's when I repeat it back to you, you hear it, you be like, no, that's not what I meant.
And that is our issue. Our issue is that my husband thinks he articulates so clearly.
We're not even talking about my articulation. We're talking about yours.
Pause. He thinks he articulates so clearly that whatever he says, then I understand it. But yet when I'm articulating,
somebody put a lot of that.
But when I'm articulating something, and you know what, that's a conversation for another time, because I've been meaning to ask you something.
You want to go ahead
about why do you get so frustrated when you're communicating something and someone, and mind you, you could be communicating something and the other person doesn't understand what you're saying, or says something to make you realize that they're not understanding or didn't hear what you said. Regardless of where the fault came in with the communication or understanding, why does it frustrate you so bad?
When you say a person.
Anyone. Like, I've seen you, whether it's with me or with our children, when you say something and it doesn't seem like they understand or they misunderstood, it's very frustrating to you. And I remember saying to him, like, baby, you act as if you are like, you have communication as far as articulating something, like it's 100%. Every time people are going to understand. And so you have to take some of that responsibility. You're
right. Because if I've ever come across, like, I believe my communication skills is 100%.
You have.
I do apologize.
Yes, you have.
I do, because I'm a solid 99.9%.
So glad that's recorded. With that being said, I'm so glad we're ending on this note to show you guys that conflict resolution is real. It happens with the best of us, the worst of us.
It does.
And it's a process. And when you love someone, when they go low, you go high.
Listen, guys, all jokes aside, seriously, when it comes to conflict resolution, let's just make sure that in our communication process, along with sharing our thoughts and feelings and concerns and the news that we're sharing, that we're also willing to comply with what the information that we're receiving. Because again, communication is a vehicle for change. So we're just looking, when we're sharing how something you did or didn't do makes us feel, we're looking for that to change so we can feel opposite of how we just felt. Or when we say, oh, babe, I love when you did A, B, C, and D. Right. What we're communicating is keep doing that. Don't ration that thing out. So we have to get to that point where we're making sure that we are communicating and complying. Right. And what that's going to foster is a deeper connection between the two of us.
And get off the boat, get off the cycle. And we'll be talking about this next week. What's our next week's topic? If you can pull that up. We should be getting them ready for next week's topic so they can have their questions and stuff. But there's this book by Dr. Eggerichs and his wife called Love and Respect. Some of you are probably familiar with it. But they talk about the crazy cycle, which has to do with love and respect. And so how women need to be shown love, men like to be respected, or they receive the way they feel loved is by being respected. Right. And women want to be shown love, and that's how they also can feel respected.
So that's what we'll be talking about.
And so we'll be talking about RESPECT. Right. But the reason why I just brought it up just now is that at the end of the day, you want to get off that crazy cycle, because I know I love him, and I love him. I'm in love with him. I chose to spend the rest of my life with him. And sometimes I think the enemy wants us to get caught up in that cycle. And when you're in that cycle, you can't see the forest for the trees. All you know is you're in survival mode. You're not thriving. And we're so used to surviving that we don't even understand there's another side to the marriage, which is thriving.
Right.
And not the fairy tale, but thriving, meaning when things come our way, we know how to navigate through it and come out on the other side, still loving each other, respecting each other. So I think that's the bigger picture, Melissa, is, you know, I know you just got married, and I think it's great that you're already self-analyzing. So it's just a matter of figuring out, this is going to take some time. How does my husband want me to apologize to him? And then I'm sure there's some things that he's still trying to figure out about you.
Right.
Conflict is inevitable.
It is inevitable, and how we handle it is going to determine the type of relationship we're going to foster. And so if we want to truly have that blissful type relationship, we're going to have to work for it. It is
She said, looking forward. Help, because I'm crazy. Listen, you are not alone.
It is definitely our desire to continue to help you all by giving you all some tips and tools and techniques that will help, because these things are really things that we're trying to use and apply in our marriage as well too. And don't forget, guys, this will be out this week. The Relationship Principles: A Guide to a Healthy and Thriving Relationship.
There are 10 principles.
There are 10 principles in here, and at the end of each principle are some questions that you and your spouse will discuss together, individually and together.
Yes, we call it Couples Corner.
Yeah, we call it Couples Corner, because we want you all to have these conversations. Because a lot of times people fail to have these conversations when they were dating.
Right.
And so now we've created something, and it's not a hard read. It is a very easy read.
It's an easy read.
Very easy read, but I think, you know, with the grace of God, you will see it as well too. It's full of some very impactful. And
it's something you can write in.
Right. You can definitely take notes in, all of that stuff. And this is something you can use as a tool. Throw this in your toolbox. Refer back to it when you guys are, even before you have conflict, you know, or after you having conflict. Refer back to these things, because these principles actually came from Scripture.
Right.
So these are biblically rooted principles.
But they can be applied to any walk of life.
They can be applied to any walk of life.
And, you know, I think it's important. Something we learn in education, how sometimes you can go in and, you know, you have a bad day. Like, you're like, oh, my goodness, I'm an awful teacher. I'm going to stop teaching. But one of the things we learn is every day is a new day. Like, you get to go in there and reestablish, okay, I know things were crazy before, but this is how it's going to be, and this is how we're going to do it. I feel the same way with marriage, although there are some things that can go on that, like, there are wounds that might take a little longer to heal, but you can start fresh as, like, we've been off track.
Right. We
need to get back on track, and we need to hold ourselves accountable for that. You can do that, and this will help you do that.
Again, guys, thank you all so much for joining us, and till next week, peace.
Holla!
Later, guys.
Bye-bye.